Wyoming Territory, July 1882. The wind hit hard across the dry plains near Laramie as Willa Ashford stepped out of the church with her wedding dress dragging in the dust, her hands shaking, her heart hollowed out. The doors slammed behind her like a final judgment. Her fiancé, Daniel, had just called off the wedding 5 minutes before they were to stand at the altar. Said she was too headstrong, too proud, too much for the life he had planned. Just like that 6 years wasted. The lace she had stitched by hand felt like it was burning against her skin. She stood on the church steps, blinking against the sun. No one followed her out. Not her father. Not her sister. Not even her so-called friends. They stayed inside with Daniel, as if his betrayal was a thing to be understood, tolerated. She realized then she had been cast out. Not just by him, but by all of them. The street was quiet. A few passers-by turned their heads, curious, but no one stopped. Willa lifted her skirts and walked toward nowhere, her boots thudding against the dirt. She did not cry. Not yet. 3 miles outside town, the land opened wide and harsh. She kept walking until her limbs burned. The sun moved higher. Her dress tore on a sagebrush. She did not stop. A low whistle reached her ears. She turned fast, startled. A man on horseback rode toward her, slowing his bay gelding as he approached. His broad frame shifted easy in the saddle. His hat pulled low against the glare. Dust streaked his boots and shirt. His eyes, steady and brown, locked on hers with quiet concern. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice rough but calm. "I do not know," she said, her throat thick. He looked at the torn dress, the bruised pride in her posture. "You heading somewhere?" "No," she said. "I was supposed to be married today." He dismounted without a word and led the horse beside her as she walked. "You live in Laramie?" he asked. "Not anymore," she said. He nodded like he understood more than she said. After a long silence, he offered, "My place is a few miles west. Got a spare room in the bunkhouse. You are welcome to rest there if you want." She hesitated. "You do not even know me. I reckon you need rest more than I need details." "Your name?" she asked. He took off his hat. "Kellan Prescott." She stared a moment. "Willa Ashford." He nodded. "All right, Willa. Let us get you out of this sun." They rode double on his horse, her fingers curled tight around the saddle horn. She did not touch him, but she could feel his calm, steady presence like a rope anchoring her to earth. Kellan's homestead sat on a rise with a wide view of the valley. The bunkhouse was clean and spare, with a narrow bed and a small table. He brought her water first, then bread and beans. He did not ask questions. He just let her sit in silence. "You always take in stray women in wedding dresses?" she asked that night, voice dry. He gave a small huff. "No. Just today." She cracked a tired smile. By the 3rd day, Willa had washed and mended her dress, then folded it at the bottom of the trunk Kellan offered her. She helped him fix a broken gate, then cooked supper that evening. He watched her from the porch, not speaking much, just letting her move at her own pace. "I should leave soon," she said that night, staring out at the stars. "Where to?" She shook her head. "No one left to take me in." "You could stay here a while," he said, leaning on the railing beside her. She looked at him. "Why would you want that?" He shrugged. "Could use the company." It was not flirtation. It was not a trap. It was just honest. That night she slept easier. Days passed. Willa learned how to saddle a horse, how to shoot a rifle. Kellan taught her without judgment. She watched the way he moved, slow, deliberate, respectful. He never looked at her like she was broken. Just like she was here. Real. One morning, she found him at the creek, shirt sleeves rolled up, hauling water. He looked up at her, then down again. She stood beside him and said, "I want to stay." He nodded once. "Good." She did not say why, but both of them knew it was no longer about having nowhere else to go. That night, after supper, he said, "You ever ride up to the ridge? Good view." She shook her head. "Take me." He saddled the horses. They rode to the top in silence. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting gold across the grass. Willa looked out, then turned to him. Daniel said I was too much, that I would never know how to love someone right. Kellan's jaw tightened. That man was a fool. She met his eyes. You do not even know me. I know enough, he said, voice quiet. You work hard. You do not quit. You look folks in the eye. That is more than most. Her breath caught. You think I am not too much? He looked straight at her. I think you were just right. She did not kiss him, not yet. But she reached out and touched his hand. He let her. She had not come here to fall in love. But something in her heart shifted that night, slow, quiet, sure. And for the first time in weeks, she believed she might be wanted after all. The wind had shifted by late August, bringing cooler nights and the scent of drying grass. Willa stood in the garden behind the main house, pinching the tops off the last of the beans, her fingers stained green and her arms tanned from the sun. Crickets sang low in the brush, and from the barn came the soft clatter of hooves on plank. Kellan had been working a new mare, a skittish roan he bought off a rancher near Elk Mountain. She straightened, brushing dirt from her palms, and looked toward the barn. The door stood open, lantern light spilling onto the dust. She crossed the yard slowly, the hem of her skirt brushing the tops of the weeds that had grown up between fence posts. Inside, he stood beside the mare, running a currycomb down her side with quiet patience. She shifted at the sound of Willa's step, but Kellan steadied her with a hand to her neck. She's still not sure about me, he said, not turning. She's watching you, Willa said, stepping closer. That's a start. Kellan hung the comb on a nail, brushing straw off his sleeves. You ever taken to animals easy? No, she said. But I always wanted to. We weren't allowed to keep any. My mother said they tracked dirt into the house and made people soft. He gave a soft grunt. That's a shame. She leaned against the stall rail. She said a woman had to be harder than the world around her, or she'd be swallowed up. Kellan looked at her then, slow and steady. You think she was right? I used to, she said. Now I'm not sure what I think. The mare snorted, shifting her weight, and Willa reached out, letting her fingers barely touch the animal's shoulder. The roan flinched but didn't move away. Kellan watched her. She's not mean. Just doesn't trust easy. I know how that feels. He nodded once. You did good coming in calm. Willa turned her hand over, palm up, and the mare lowered her nose to sniff it. She smiled, just a little. Maybe I'm not as hard as I thought. You're strong, he said. That's not the same thing. She looked at him. You don't say much, do you? He shrugged. Only when it matters. They left the barn together, the sky streaked with rose and lavender. He walked her to the porch where a bowl of dried apples sat beside a tin of coffee. She reached for a slice, chewing slowly. I've been thinking, he said, leaning on the rail. About what you said. How you were told you were too much. Willa's jaw tensed. I don't want to talk about him. I'm not asking you to, he said. But I want you to know something. You're not too much. You're just not easy. She narrowed her eyes. That's supposed to be a comfort? It's meant to be the truth, he said. Easy things don't last long out here. The wind wears them down. The hard ground takes them. But something with grit, something real that holds. She looked at him for a long moment. So you think stubborn women are built for the frontier? I think women with fire in their belly make the best company when the nights get cold, he said. She laughed, low in her throat. That sounds like the closest thing to a compliment I'm going to get from you. He gave her a sideways glance. You want pretty words, you're better off finding a poet. Maybe I don't want pretty, she said. Maybe I want true. Kellan reached out then, slow and sure, and brushed a speck of dust from her cheek. His fingers were calloused warm. She didn't pull away. Then you're in the right place, he said quietly. They stood like that as the crickets started up again, louder now, like they had something to say. Later, as she washed the supper tin in the basin out back, she caught her reflection in the water, hair pulled back, sunburn on her nose, eyes steady. Not the woman who fled town in tatters. No lace. No guests. Just grit under her nails and a steadiness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Inside, Kellan set a book down on the table, spine cracked and pages yellowed. She stepped in and tilted her head. You read. When there's time, he said. This one's about a man who wandered too far from home and found something worth staying for. She pulled out the chair across from him. Does he stay? He does, Kellan said. She nodded. Then it's a good story. They read together in silence, the kind that settled like a warm quilt stitched with understanding. And when the oil lamp burned low, she looked at him and said, I'm not going anywhere. His answer was just a quiet look, but in it was everything she needed. The first frost came early. One morning in late September, Willa stepped outside and saw a thin crust of white clinging to the fence rails and the brittle tops of the sage. She pulled Kellan's old coat tighter around her shoulders. It was too big in the arms, smelled faintly of pine smoke and horse, but it held her like a memory worth keeping. She found him by the west pasture, hammering a new post into place where the soil had softened after last week's rain. He didn't look up as she approached, just lifted the hammer again and drove it down with a sharp thud. You've been at it since dawn? She asked. He paused, adjusted the post. Fence won't fix itself. She crouched beside the supply wagon, sorting through the nails. If you're going to work yourself into the ground, you might as well let me help bury you. He gave a short breath through his nose. I was hoping you'd bring coffee, not threats. I did both, she said, holding out the tin cup. He took it, warm against his calloused fingers. You sleep all right? There was a mouse in the roof again, she said, scratching like it was digging for gold. Probably just cold, he said. They start looking for whatever warmth they can find. She studied him a moment. You ever think about leaving this place? He drank, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I left once. Rode all the way to Kansas City after my pa died. Thought I'd find something different. Maybe easier. And? Didn't suit me, he said. Too many voices. Nowhere to breathe. You ever miss people? He glanced toward the horizon. I miss some. She let that hang a while, then stood and handed him a fresh post from the wagon bed. I think I used to believe staying meant giving up. He looked at her. And now? I'm starting to think it's the bravest thing a person can do. Later that day, she rode out alone to the edge of the property, trailing her fingers through the rabbit brush as the gelding picked its way down a shallow ravine. She stopped near a dry creek where a single cottonwood struggled against the wind, its leaves already yellowing. She dismounted and sat in the dust, letting the quiet wrap around her. She thought of her father's study, the shelves lined with ledgers and law books, the way he used to say a woman's reputation was the only thing she owned outright. She remembered the silence in the church after Daniel's words, how no one had stepped forward. She pressed her palm to the cool earth. When she returned near sundown, Kellan was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring something rich and thick over the stove. You cook now? She asked, hanging her hat on the peg. Only if I'm tired of salt pork, he said. She leaned against the wall, watched him ladle stew into 2 bowls. You ever think about what it would be like to have someone here for good? He set the bowls down. I don't think about it, he said. I know. She sat across from him, the steam rising between them. And if that someone's still figuring out what she wants? Then I wait, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She stared at the stew a long moment. I'm not afraid of the work. Or the land. But I am afraid of being looked at like I'm a burden. You're not, he said, voice quiet. You carry your own weight. And you carry more than that. They ate without speaking after that. But when she stood to clear the bowls, he didn't let her. Come with me, he said, wiping his hands. She followed him out across the yard, past the barn and toward the bluff that overlooked the valley. The moon had risen, pale and full, and the stars came out by the hundreds. He stopped near the edge, his boots crunching dry grass. I buried my mother out here, he said. She died the first year we came west. Willa didn't speak. She used to sit right here, he continued. Said the sky made her feel like she wasn't alone. Willa stepped beside him. I think she was right. He turned, took her hand, and placed something small in her palm. A silver pendant, worn smooth at the edges. The front etched with a crescent. She wore it every day, he said. Said it reminded her that even when the sky looks empty, something good is always rising. Willa swallowed. Why are you giving it to me? Because I see the same thing in you, he said. And I want you to have it. She closed her fingers around it, feeling the weight, the years in its surface. Then she looked up and met his gaze. "I'm not going back," she said. "Not to any life that tells me I'm too much." "I wouldn't let you," he said. She stepped closer, the grass brushing her boots. "And if I stayed for good? I'd build you a house next spring," he said, "with your name carved in the doorframe." She nodded once. "Then I'll stay." When she kissed him, it wasn't urgent or uncertain. It was steady, like everything she'd been walking toward had finally opened wide and welcomed her home. And this time, she didn't need anyone's permission to believe in it. By late October, the wind carried the scent of snow, sharp and metallic, curling through the cottonwoods beyond Kellan's fields. Willa spent most mornings in the shed behind the main house, fitting patches into the knees of Kellan's work trousers and sewing new linings into the winter coats they'd found in a trunk beneath the bunkhouse bed. The fabric smelled of cedar, and years gone still held together, though barely. The firewood stack behind the house had dwindled. That afternoon, Kellan hitched the wagon and asked her to ride with him into the upper grove where the cottonwoods grew thick and tall. She brought gloves and a hat she'd made from an old petticoat, stitched tight around the brim to keep the wind from stealing it. They reached the grove by midday, the sun pale and far off behind a sky the color of pewter. Kellan climbed down without a word, began marking trees with the back of his axe. Willa stepped lightly behind him, brushing her hand over a fallen branch. "You ever spend winters alone?" "4 of them," he said, still looking at the trees. "Last one near broke me." She nodded once. "What changed?" He rested the axe handle against his boot, turned toward her. "I stopped trying to pretend it didn't matter." She adjusted her gloves. "And this year?" He watched her a long moment, then said, "This year's different." They felled 2 trees before the sun slid low. Willa helped load the logs, her arms aching before they were halfway through. She didn't complain. Kellan didn't ask her to stop. Back at the homestead, she lit the stove while he unloaded the wagon. Supper was thin stew and boiled squash, but neither of them mentioned the lack of meat. The preserves were nearly gone. Kellan had already stretched the flour with cornmeal. After they ate, he pulled a folded paper from the pocket of his coat and laid it on the table between them. "Found this in town 2 weeks ago. Meant to show you sooner." She unfolded it carefully. A handbill advertising a new schoolhouse being built south of Rock Creek. They were asking for someone to teach the children of the cattle hands and sharecroppers who'd settled along the drainage basin. "They're offering a room above the hall," he said. "Small wage. Simple work." Willa traced the edge of the paper. "You think I should go?" "I think it's yours if you want it," he said. "Doesn't have to mean you're leaving." "I never taught before," she said. "No one starts with knowing," he replied. She leaned back, eyes still on the paper. "And if I did take it, I'd ride out most days. Be gone from here." He didn't flinch. "I'd be here when you got back." She folded the handbill again, slower this time. "You'd let me choose it for myself?" "I'd want you to," he said. That night, she sat by the hearth, threading new laces into her boots. Kellan came in from the barn, the smell of hay and cold clinging to him. He didn't speak, just knelt beside her, pulled one boot gently toward him, and tied the final knot. She watched his hands. "You treat everything like it's worth keeping." He looked up. "Not everything is. But you are." Her chest tightened. "You believe in me more than I ever did." "I don't need you to be anything you're not," he said. "Just stay as you are and let me stand beside it." She moved her hand to his cheek, rough with stubble and cold. "You've never asked for anything." "I've been waiting for the right thing to want," he said. She kissed him then, slower than before, her fingers sliding into his hair. This time she didn't hesitate. When they parted, she stayed close, her forehead resting against his. "Come spring," she whispered, "I'll teach those children. And I'll come home to you after every lesson." He nodded. "We'll build that house." Her breath caught on a quiet laugh. "With my name in the doorframe. And a porch wide enough for 2 chairs," he said. She leaned into him, eyes closed. "Then let winter come. I've got all I need now." By November, the Rock Creek schoolhouse stood half-finished, its frame angled against the sky like a promise still being shaped. Willa visited once a week, traveling on Kellan's sorrel gelding, bringing her own slate and a worn reader she'd borrowed from the town library. The children met her in the open air, sitting on crates and stumps, their cheeks red from the cold, their eyes bright with questions. She taught them letters, numbers, and how to listen without fear. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. On the homestead, snow came light but steady. Kellan built a windbreak behind the barn using pine planks salvaged from the old cattle corral. Willa helped him brace it, handing up nails while he balanced on the ladder, his breath white against the sky. "You ever think about raising something besides cattle?" she asked, steadying the rail beneath him. He leaned to drive the next nail. "Like what?" "Apples. Maybe chickens. Something small enough we could eat every day without planning for it." He looked down at her, hammer paused mid-air. "You thinking of planting roots?" She nodded. "I want to build something that keeps growing, even when we're not looking." By December, they'd cleared the plot east of the main house. Kellan unearthed stones by hand, stacking them into a low wall. Willa marked rows with stakes and twine, already planning what would go where come spring. They worked in silence sometimes, but it wasn't empty. It was full of decisions neither of them had to say aloud anymore. One night, snow came heavy and fast, blanketing the yard before they could bring in the last of the firewood. Kellan pulled on his coat and boots without a word. Willa followed, wrapping her shawl tight. They worked side by side, stacking logs beneath the eaves, their hands stiff with cold but sure. When they came inside, she unwrapped her scarf and looked at him across the lamplit room. "When I left Laramie, I thought all I had was what I'd lost." He poured water into the basin, nodding once. "But now," she said, "I see everything I never would have found if I'd stayed." He set the pitcher down and crossed to her. "You found more than land and work." "I found you," she said. He reached for her hand and held it between both of his, rough and warm. "I've known since that first day you walked out of the dust in that torn dress. You didn't ask for pity. You just kept going. I didn't know where else to go. You came here," he said. "That was enough." She leaned into him, letting her forehead rest against his chest. "I want a life with you, the kind we build slow, with trees that outlast us." "You have it," he said. That same night, they laid the pendant he'd given her, his mother's, on the mantel above the hearth. Not as a keepsake, but as a marker. Not of what had been lost, but what had been chosen. By January, they were married in the parlor of a neighbor's home, with snow falling past the window and the smell of yeast bread rising from the kitchen. The preacher was a rancher's son with a worn Bible and a steady voice. Willa wore a wool skirt she'd dyed with elderberries, and Kellan stood beside her in his best shirt, collar newly pressed. There were no vows beyond what they already lived each day: work, trust, and the quiet agreement to keep showing up no matter the weather. They returned home together, riding the sled Kellan had built the week before. Willa rested her gloved hand on his knee as the homestead came into view, golden light flickering behind the windows. That first night as husband and wife, they sat by the fire, not speaking much, just watching the flames curl and settle. He traced the edge of her wrist with his thumb, and she leaned into him, warm and still. Years passed. The orchard they planted grew slow but sure, first shoots, then blossoms, then fruit. The schoolhouse finished by midsummer, its roof tarred against the rains, and Willa taught there 5 days a week, returning home before dusk. Kellan kept fewer cattle and more hens. He built her a writing desk beside the kitchen window where she kept her lesson plans and a small vase for wildflowers. In spring, they added a porch just like he'd promised, wide and shaded, with 2 chairs facing west. They sat there most evenings, watching the light fade over the hills, her hand always finding his without needing to search. They never spoke of what had come before, not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer held weight. What they carried now was different, softened by time, strengthened by choice. They had no children, but the land bore their names in every fence repaired, every row weeded, every trail worn by familiar boots. The neighbors came to them for help, and they gave it freely. Come winter, folks gathered in their kitchen for warmth and bread and stories told low over coffee. And when Willa grew gray at the temples and Kellan's hands began to stiffen in the cold, they still rose before dawn, still worked side by side, still ended each day with one chair pulled close to the other. They had made a life not out of grand gestures, but out of steady ones. A life that held. A life that lasted. And in the quiet of each long evening, they knew they had found every kind of love worth having.